Hi, my name is Vicky Pasquantonio, and I'm education producer at the PBS NewsHour, and I run NewsHour Extra, our middle and high school classroom resource website. I also produce the Journalism in Action website, and now is my favorite part. I get to introduce my three fellow curriculum writers who are as bright, caring, and creative a bunch as it gets. So first up, Greg is a freelance curriculum writer and has written lessons for several PBS productions, including the NewsHour, Frontline, American Experience, and various Ken Burns productions. Liz Ramos is, note, present tense, is a classroom teacher, a U.S. history teacher at Alta Loma High School in Rancho Cucamonga, California. Liz was awarded the California Council for the Social Studies Senior High Outstanding Teacher for exploring ways to integrate technology into her classroom, and has involved her students in all sorts of ed tech kind of things like creating documentaries, digital storytelling, and inquiry. And last but not least, Sid Golston is a past president of NCSS, and she's taught at all grade levels from middle school to college, specializing in civics and women's history, and also served as an educational administrator, curriculum writer, historian, and author of several books for students and teachers. And we'll have Sid lead us off on how the site works and the big picture of it. And so take it away, Sid.
Well, we're going to use one unit that is on immigration and exploitation of immigrant labor to show you the features that will be in all of the units. This one is titled Triangle Shirtwaist Factory Fire and Migrant Workers. And when we get there, you'll see that our journalist of the unit is Edward R. Murrow. Edward R. Murrow was a pioneer in investigating issues in investigative journalism on television. But we actually start a little earlier than this and go to newspapers. In the introduction to every unit, you'll see introduction, investigation, outcome. In the introduction is a lot of content. Also, an essential question. Every unit has one. In this case, it is how did journalists cover the exploitation of migrant and immigrant workers in the early to mid 20th century? The overview section will be very content rich. There will not only be Library of Congress resources, but also descriptions of the context and history of the eras that we're dealing with. We all know that the Triangle Shirtwaist Factory Fire coverage led to what we have today as OSHA, the Occupational Safety and Administration, and Health Administration. Okay, then we switch and we go past the early 19th century into the mid 20th century, when television brought to us a new form of journalism. And we have to go on to the migrant farm workers. And when we look at those examples, we see something that exists even today. There are problems in today's factories with COVID outbreaks that we know affect immigrants more than they do others. As we'll see in these pictures of Cesar Chavez and other union organizers, the power of journalism was very, very strong to tell us this story. In every unit, there will be an annotated image. That's an image that you can see up close with a magnifier. But the reason I think this one's particularly important is it's a photograph. We want students to be able to evaluate everything they see, even visual cues have to be interpreted. The point of this flyer that went into newspapers was that every time you buy grapes, you're hurting poor children. At the very end of the unit, we find an opportunity to be your own journalist and examine an issue that you think deserves investigation today. And you get to create your own story. You can choose to do this as a video, or you can choose to do this as a newspaper. If you do a video, you're pretending that you are on 60 Minutes. You're the one who is Lesley Stahl or one of the journalists, and you create your own story. It might be very relevant to something that is an issue to students today, such as gun control, or it could be something having to do with COVID, for instance. But that is the creative part of every unit. So the tools that we're using are high content, investigative skills, looking at outcomes, creating your own creative interpretation, and making civic engagement work for the student in a very personal way, using primary sources they probably wouldn't find elsewhere, and devolving into a real engagement by the student.
Thanks, Sid. Well, we're now going to share 3 types of the interactives in more detail on the Journalism in Action site. And let's do them in chronological order because we are history teachers after all. So Greg Timmons, will you take it away, the first interactive, and I think you're using the American Revolution case study?
Yeah, that's right. The American Revolution case study covers a period from the 1760s to the very early 1800s. So this would involve pre-revolutionary discussions about freedom issues with taxation without representation, and moving all the way through the Revolution, the early Republic, touching upon the Federalist Papers and some other areas, and then also looking at the election of 1800 and some of the journalism and propaganda that went on during that time. All of the units, as was pointed out earlier, have 3 separate sections to them. There's the introduction, investigation, and the outcomes. I'm going to jump us to the investigation section to get into the annotation activity as quickly as possible here. As you scroll through this, you'll see that there's various elements within here, activities on primary source material that students can look at here. Details can be seen through the magnifying tool that's used here. But also we've got a section down here of that actual text written out in more modern text material, not language. It's the same word verbiage, but it helps students kind of work their ways between the F's and S's that were used in the old style printing and modern day printing today. Section down here for students to do an interactive activity of answering questions. They can write in information in the sections and then save that for later usage. Here we have the annotate the image activity. And usually they start out with a series of questions. In this case, we have 3. And we're going to be looking at this particular cartoon, if you will, editorial print of the Stamp Act. The topic here anyway is the Stamp Act, and in this particular case, it's the repeal of the Stamp Act. It's a real brief information on this particular piece. It was actually commissioned by supporters of the repeal in the British government. What students will do is they'll work through this thing here. We have some brief instructions here on how to go through this activity, the questions that are given. And I want to point you to this little annotation tool here. This is actually a toggle switch here that will move students from a magnifying mode to an annotation mode. I'll start with the magnification mode, which again, it gives us this magnifying glass where we can see greater details of the imagery that's been put in here. You can see here that we're on some kind of a docking area. There's warehouses up through this region. There's 3 ships here. And then there's this funeral procession here. Students with some deeper research would understand that these gentlemen in here are people that had supported the Stamp Act, and now they're in a funeral procession for its repeal. You can kind of tell some aspects of that by the skulls here that they're ahead of the procession. All right, I'm going to run you through this here just to show how this kind of works. I'll switch us back to the annotation mode. Go up to the first question here. It says, which features make it clear that the funeral procession taking place is after the repeal of the Stamp Act? Well, as fate would have it, a really easy indication is right here up in this section here, which talks about the repeal itself. Let me go back to the magnification mode here real quick. And I'll show here, it says the repeal. And then it says on the funeral of Miss AME, meaning America, and then the stamp. So we'll go over to the annotated mode, and we'll highlight that. And what we get down here is a little section here where we can put in information here. And we'll just put in the title. Title says it all, and we'll save that. And then down here, annotation is written down here for all to see. So what this does is it becomes a very interactive tool for students to actually interpret what the image and or if it's a text material, what it's all about. Hopefully by studying this, by this time, students that have studied this piece will know that this is something that was in favor of repeal, and that's the artist's point of view between the various sections. But this also gives them an opportunity then to not only express their opinion that yes, they do think the artist is in favor of repeal, but they can draw from the information they've already used or they've already developed through the other questions to support that in some kind of a small essay statement. And I'm just going to finish this off for down here. We have a button here that says save and download. So the information can be saved into the student's credit account and can be then later shared with the teacher or shared with other students for discussions and other activities from there.
Thanks, Greg. All right, so now, Liz, do you want your interactive on the case study, one of the case studies you wrote, which is on World War II?
Sure, thank you, Vicki. And so we're going to be taking a look at the female journalist of World War II. And again, as mentioned, we have the introduction, then you get to investigation. And the nice thing is just as our newspapers make sense of the community to get out their stories, the social media aspect is going to have the kids take that information, synthesize it, and come up with a social media post. And that's what we're going to take a look at. So after your students would have gone through and taken a look at a piece from Mary Craig, and they have the questions to scaffold as Greg has shown you. And then the kids are kind of going to bring it all together. So this is kind of like the Jerry Maguire, show me the money, show me the learning moment. And so the kids are going to take that information from the primary sources and their learnings and synthesize it. And so the kids are going to, in this scenario, they are the social media editor of a newsroom. And they've been assigned to write a post about the anniversary of World War II based on one of the photographs in the carousel, based on the journalists that they have just taken a look at. And they'll have some background information because they have done that deep dive, read the biographies and analyzed them. And so the students would then select an image and then they're going to create a post. So they're going to have that summary post in response to kind of like commemorate, just as we see Library of Congress does today, and news, we have anniversaries of different events in history that we commemorate today too. So they're going to put themselves in a journalist role, going back and analyzing and commemorating that. But then here's the nice thing too, is they're going to have to add comments, and that's going to require their critical thinking. So your students would come over here to select an image, and they have a carousel here where they have this arrow to go forward or backward and a little bit of information here from about the photo. And so they would get to select one that they would take a look at, and then they're going to write a post commemorating the anniversary of World War II and the contributions of these female journalists. And so they would write their summary in here, and then they would come in here and they're going to add a comment to the post. What might somebody react? And this is going to force them to have that metacognition, that critical thinking, putting things in time, and maybe somebody's making a connection. Oh, that my aunt or somebody was a relative of that, or this led to the creation of UNICEF today. And so the kids are going to get to elaborate and make connections based off of their learnings. And they will come over here and they'll have the opportunity to create that post, and they can, again, save it and download it into their profile that they've registered with, Or as mentioned before, they could go ahead and download that to their computer and share it where the teacher would like them to share.
Thanks, Liz. I think it's also a great lesson in digital citizenship, making those comments for the social media post. I like that. Well, I have the last interactive to explain. This is on our case study, gender equality. And so there you, of course, you have Gloria Steinem. And so we're gonna just scroll down. This is the outcome section. This interactive is, you know, they're all unique and fun in their own ways, but this really puts the student, like the idea of student voice really comes to life in this final interactive, which is the last interactive of each case study. So, and it's called Create Your Own Story. And basically we have, there's so many social justice movements, you know, that have taken place, but particularly in these students' lives. Of course, there's kind of cool, fun technology involved because that kind of is a neat element to the Journalism in Action website. So you're going to go down here and it says create your own story. And you can either choose a newspaper, which kind of mimics like a website, newspaper, news outlet website, or magazine cover. So if time is of the essence, the magazine cover is a little quicker, which is nice to have sort of that time choice, but I'm going to go with newspaper. And so essentially you've been asked to explore, the student has been asked to explore a social movement. And we put Judy Woodruff first because, well, we can't help it. We love Judy Woodruff, but essentially she's covered so many of these. And so if you're really doing it from the eye of the journalist, then that would be kind of a neat person to explore. And she's done a lot on Me Too and other movements. So basically this is the Women's March in Washington. And the next picture, pro-life activists, so March for Life rally. We have March for Our Lives about gun violence. We have the youth-led climate protests, and we have the Tea Party movement. And so basically, let's say, okay, I'm gonna go with the climate. I'm gonna hit select because I just think that picture is pretty awesome. And so we then have, let's say we're adding a title. So the climate protests. And again, we know youth played such an important voice. So let's make that the subheading. And you could write your few paragraphs, your opinion of how the news media covered the social movement. And you get to learn about the movement itself. And so we want to share that with our classmates using a learning management system, or email it to a family or friend. Hey, what are you learning about during COVID? You know, there is a lot of learning going on during this digital remote time. And so that is the interactive of the Create Your Own. So we're now going to hear from Liz about deeper pedagogical connections using the Journalism in Action website. And so give us your wisdom there, Liz. Take it away.
Okay, so when we're looking at the Journalism in Action, this is going to help our students with those historical thinking connections. So like when they're doing the introduction, we're getting that essential question, overview, context, then use format, and then they're investigating, they're going through the primary sources, they're doing the questions, they're writing, they're putting it all together. And in the outcome, they got the how the event in journalism has evolved, the modern civic connections, and they're taking a look at the historical significance, the cause and consequence of what's happened on here. They're looking at those different historical perspectives. They're doing the work of historians by engaging with primary sources. They're seeing how continuity and change, some of the issues that were back in the day are different but similar things that we're grappling with in today's society, and looking at those ethical dilemmas of history that are important for us to consider. So our kids are having those opportunities to take a look at that. And we know in history, social science right now, we want our kids to be doing inquiry, and the inquiry arc is big in our discipline. And so they are developing those questions. They're applying the disciplinary tools when they're going through the investigation. They're evaluating the sources. And then when they're doing the outcomes, they're helping to communicate their conclusions and taking informed action. So they're going through the C3 inquiry arc in the course of completing a Journalism in Action inquiry. And so I know we're very concerned in the time of distance learning with SEL. We've always been concerned about it, but I know this is a big topic that we're all kind of aware of. This is helping our kids with self-awareness, identifying emotions, social awareness, taking empathy for things that have happened in the past, decision-making, and seeing how people have decided to take action and change course of history and call out things that were wrong in history. And self-management. In the course of doing an inquiry, they're having to pace themselves out to complete these tasks and communicating their ideas in the chosen tasks that they have taken to. So in the course of completing these, we're also helping our kids to develop those social, emotional, and soft skills that are very important. And something I ask you to think of, you can also use the download that the kids have completed their task, and consider having the students upload it to something like a Padlet or a Google Drive folder, so then all the kids can see the different points of view and takeaways from the products that they've created. I think it's important for us to share the inquiry and conclusions that the students have. And that further helps to develop that empathy and understanding the point of view and connecting them with social justice standards from the teaching tolerance, how different kids will come at things differently. And so we can also bring in that collective wisdom that we have. So these are just some things to consider, and connections that we have with our curriculum, historical thinking skills, our soft skills, and SEL, all those things that are very important. And we really want to try to help and support our kids in distance learning, which Journalism in Action's made for, with it all being on a digital platform and everything right there nicely wrapped up for our students.